All right, welcome back. Joining us virtually this afternoon, we have local attorney Alex Stanford. Alex, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Taylor. Great to be here as always.
It's great to have you. So today we're talking about the Breonna Taylor case. So last week the grand jury made a decision, and sometime today those proceedings are expected to be released. So going back to last week, how could you kind of in layman's terms explain what happened for the general public?
Well, I guess the first thing is procedurally what happened was whenever you have a crime where a life is taken, you have to decide whether or not to initiate formal prosecution against the suspect. And in this case, the suspect would be the officers who fired their weapons. And the way that is done is you collect what's called a grand jury, which is basically just any old person who's selected for jury duty. And they are allowed to be presented the entirety of all the evidence. And so it's not a trial. All they're being given is the evidence, and they have to determine if there's just a more likely than not, if they assume all this stuff is true, grounds to proceed to trial. And so it's a very low threshold. It's not like the beyond a reasonable doubt threshold of evidence that we have at the trial level. This is a much more lower level, like a preponderance of the evidence. So the state only has the burden of like 51%. And so if they can show that 51% is more likely in their favor than not, then the grand jury says go ahead. So they listen to everything. And what they did is they determined that the only crime that they felt that there was sufficient evidence to present a charge was with what's called wanton endangerment with one of the detectives, one of the officers. And that is a crime that basically is when you fire your weapons and you are grossly negligent in making sure your safety is ensured, that you're not putting the public at risk, that you're not being careful of what your backgrounds are. But as far as like the shooting into Breonna Taylor herself that ultimately killed her, or into her boyfriend at the time, there were no charges presented along those lines, and that's what got a lot of people upset, because the narratives that were told. So if we go into what the information was that the grand jury was presented with, a lot of the narrative that the headlines presented to us showed that it wasn't exactly true. So we saw that there were witnesses, and even the testimony of the boyfriend himself indicated that the officers did knock 3 different times, and it was after the 3rd time of knocking where the door had not been answered that they used a battering ram to break in the door. Breonna Taylor and her boyfriend were in the hallway, and he had his gun at the ready, and as soon as the detectives and the officers entered the domicile, the very first shot was from the boyfriend's gun, and so the officers returned fire. Breonna Taylor was struck. And so in order to be able to deliver an indictment on the officers for her death, what they would have needed to see is that there was a defect with the warrant, that possibly it was the wrong address, that they didn't properly execute the warrant, that there was some violation on their behalf that ended up leading to the death. But what the evidence showed was that the warrant was properly issued. There was a proper affidavit of probable cause signed by a magistrate. It was executed properly. It had the right address. They did knock and identify themselves. Now, there is a little bit of a dispute about whether the boyfriend heard that, but as far as what the evidence, the undisputable evidence shows, they did knock and they did break in the door, so that was all legal. And so there are some questions about, what was the state of mind of the boyfriend at the time versus what was the state of mind of the cops. But that's not super relevant to what the grand jury was looking at, because they aren't allowed to resolve issues of fact as far as like what was heard. They're just looking at, okay, this is all the evidence, and they didn't think that there was enough there to support, a manslaughter charge, or let alone a murder charge. I mean, so that's the long and short of it. It's a pretty intense thing, and
it's a lot to take in.
Some issues with the drug lords. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Alex, you always come on and try to explain things in ways that people who don't practice law, like myself, can understand in digestible bites. If you guys at home want to rewatch this, I'm going to post Alex's interview on our website, klaf.com. Before we go to break, though, let's check in with Adam.